Good morning. I'm Sunny Freund. I'm a senior accounting major and a Parker Scholar in the Parker College of Business. I'm here today to interview another one of our faculty members for another installment of Research That Matters. Joining me today is Dr. Brian Dowis, an associate professor in the field of accountancy. He is here to discuss his latest research and how it will affect the people who work in the field. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Dowis.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me this morning.
Can you briefly summarize your research project and its conclusion?
Absolutely. So my research project over the summer was I was looking at a particular part of the Internal Revenue Code. It was section 6901 and 6902. And so kind of the scenario that comes into play with those code sections are where you have a taxpayer who is the transferee, and they have stock in a corporation. And so the taxpayer finds someone to buy the stock, and within that corporation you have capital gains assets. And so the purchaser, who is the transferor, they get the stock, and then the corporation ends up selling this capital gains asset, which creates capital gains tax. Now the IRS, they like to collect on tax liability when they're duly owed that, right? And so soon after the transferor receives the stock, the corporation sells the asset, and then the proceeds are given to the transferor. And so the transferor receives proceeds and creates tax liability. Now, shortly thereafter, the corporation is insolvent, which means they can't pay their liabilities anymore. And so the IRS wants their money, right? And so typically they go after the corporation first, and then they go after the transferor. But if they can't collect from either of those, then they actually have a remedy where they can go after the transferee, right? And so it's kind of an interesting project because it brings up substance versus form, that doctrine. It also intersects federal law and state law. And so it's super interesting because you're seeing where does the state law take precedence, or does the federal law take precedence? So it's a really unique concept where those things clash. And so I specifically looked at judge gender. I also looked at political affiliation, and because I like to see kind of those behavioral characteristics. And with political affiliation, the way that I deemed, or the way that I looked at that was kind of unique because I looked at specifically at the U.S. tax court. And the U.S. tax court are judges that have expertise in tax, right? And so, but they're also, if they're a regular judge, they're appointed by the President of the United States. And so the way that I determined their political affiliation is I looked at the president that appointed them when they're a regular judge. So you have a couple different types of judges. You have a regular judge, you have senior judges, and then you have like a special trial judge. The regular judges are appointed by the President of the United States. The senior judges typically have experience as a tax court judge, but they're appointed by the special trial judge. And so the way that I kind of deemed their political affiliation is I looked at the president who was in office when they were appointed to the U.S. tax court. Ultimately, I found with my results that so I looked at whether there was a statistically significant difference between how male and female judges render decisions in this area. And then I also looked at if there was a statistically significant difference on how the judges rule in this area based on their political affiliation. In both areas, I actually found no statistical significance, which kind of gives evidence that the judges are making decisions free of gender bias. They're also making decisions free of maybe we can call it political affiliation bias. And I've done some research in the tax court before. I've looked at reasonable comp in closely held corporations. I've looked at hobby losses, which is looking at for-profit activities versus not-for-profit activities. I looked at employee versus independent contractor when trying to classify what a worker is. I've also looked at innocent spouse relief in the U.S. tax court. And to me, it's really neat to look at how these decisions are being made and whether characteristics such as gender and political affiliation come into play.
That sounds like really important research. So how did you become interested in this topic?
So when I was getting my doctorate, my mentor who I was working with, we evaluated decisions made in the tax court a lot. And so as I started to do more and more research, I found it super interesting, especially seeing real life situations occurring and seeing how the IRS tends to challenge issues, as well as how the courts tend to respond and the rationale behind their decision. And so to me, I kind of, after I did kind of one research project, I started to look at, all right, this is really neat. I really enjoy looking at this part of tax, because if we look at judges and their rulings, in essence, they're kind of molding law through their decision making. So I thought that was super interesting. And so I kind of look for areas where first, there's a lot of cases being litigated in those areas. And then I like to look at the kind of behavioral characteristics of gender, political affiliation. I've also looked at family composition, because in the past that has found to be significant. So I looked at that as well. And to me, it's just kind of, it's super interesting. And it also provides kind of framework into assisting practitioners, assisting the IRS as both move forward to see if the law is kind of getting at what it's trying to accomplish.
Thank you so much for sharing. So what does this mean for business, and how can people in the business community use or benefit from your research?
That's a great question. With my research, I like to just provide information, right? And so provide information to practitioners, maybe on the success of challenging an IRS challenge, because they're saying, hey, this isn't allowed, or you need to pay more tax in this area. Also, I'm trying to maybe give the IRS more insight into, all right, do our laws need to be changed, or do they need to be modified so that what they're getting at is really the heart and spirit of what they're trying to do.
Thank you. So how do you incorporate your research about this topic into the classroom?
So that's a great question. So a lot of times with my research, some other areas of my research is model creation. And so with model creation, we look at what the IRS says, hey, this is the guidance that we want you to use. And so I take that, I do some statistical analysis, and sometimes I find that, hey, 20 factors were outlined by the IRS with regards to employee versus independent contractor status. Well, let's take those. Let's look at the years that have occurred since the rulings have come out, and let's see if we can really build the most significant factors, and then see if we can build a predictive model to help see what's really most important when it actually makes it to court. And so one particular instance with employee versus independent contract, they had 20 factors. And we found that around 3 factors actually predicted 91% of the decisions over 90% of the decisions that were made in the court. So to me, that's super interesting, because it gives even more insight into when practitioners are advising their clients. As well as, maybe if the clients don't have these factors going in their favor, let's just try to settle with the IRS because maybe we don't have a strong case. So it could help with time where, the clients are like, you know what, let's just pay this because the chances of success are not high, and the IRS is probably correct in their ruling.
Finally, we have one more question for you. What are some unanswered questions about this research that you feel could be further explored?
Yeah, great question. So typically what I do after I kind of finish a project is I kind of look at other areas that are being highly litigated, or other areas that could potentially be petitioned for the Supreme Court, just to see, all right, do we have anything that we can look at to give insight into practitioners, to give insight into the IRS? So as I teach my classes, it's kind of neat because I'll see kind of topics that maybe originally weren't super interesting, but as I see kind of all the pieces that come into play, I'm like, you know what, that may be worth researching and figuring out. All right, let's look at it from a couple different perspectives to see if we can get any significance, in maybe judge gender, maybe model creation, maybe differences based on political affiliation. So I'm always kind of looking for ideas that can that may be impactful in terms of, all right, if I kind of look at the variables I've looked at in the past, and then as I dig deeper into it, I'm going to see, oh, well, maybe some other variables jump out to me in terms of something that is noteworthy of investigating.
Thank you, Dr. Dowis, for your time today. I hope that you enjoyed hearing more about our faculty members' research. We'll see you soon on the next installment of Research That Matters.